The market was loud with voices. Humans shouted prices, children laughed, and machines hummed in the background. But in one corner she stood alone, silent, her basket filled with strange vegetables no one wanted to touch. She did not speak. She did not call customers, she only waited, her big eyes watching people pass. Whispers followed her everywhere. "That alien again," someone muttered. "She doesn't talk." Another said, pulling her child away. "Dangerous, strange, untrustworthy." Those were the words humans used when they looked at her. And so, day after day, she became like a shadow, always there but unseen. Her hands were thin, her clothes old, but her basket always carried fresh herbs and spices. Every evening, she walked back to her empty shelter with unsold food. And every night, she cooked a small meal only for herself. Cooking was the only place she felt alive, the only way she could remember. Her family, her world, her past. On this day, one human stopped. His name was Daniel, an engineer who fixed broken machines in the colony. He was tired carrying tools, his face marked with grease and dust. But unlike the others, his eyes stayed on her hands, not on her silence. He noticed something different, something that others ignored. Her hands smelled of spices, warm and comforting, not like a merchant, not like someone selling for profit, but like a person who loved food. He stepped closer, and she looked up, startled. For a moment, their eyes met, her dark, quiet eyes and his tired, curious ones. Daniel tilted his head, then asked softly, "You cook?" Her breath caught, her lips pressed together, and for a long second she said nothing. Then slowly, she nodded, just once, her basket trembling slightly in her hands. The market noise seemed far away, as if time itself had paused. Daniel gave a small smile, a human smile, something warm she had almost forgotten. And then, with no warning, he said, "Come, cook in my kitchen." The world inside her chest shook. No one had ever said such words to her. She froze, thinking maybe she misheard, maybe he was joking. But Daniel's eyes were steady, patient, kind. He extended his hand, waiting, not forcing, just offering. Her mind screamed to refuse. Humans did not trust her. She was not welcome in their homes. If she stepped inside, maybe others would hate her more. Maybe something bad would happen. But her heart whispered different words. Her heart remembered the warmth of kitchens long gone, the voices of family lost in the war, and her heart longed, even just for one evening, to feel safe again. Slowly, she placed the basket against her chest, and with a hesitant step, followed him. The market behind them fell away, the whispers echoing like fading ghosts. People stared, shocked, as Daniel walked with the alien woman by his side. Some shook their heads, some muttered insults, but Daniel did not stop. He simply guided her through narrow streets until they reached his small home. The door creaked as it opened. Inside, the air smelled of oil, metal, and old bread. It was not grand. It was not rich, but it was warm. And for her, it felt like another world. She stood in the doorway, uncertain, her eyes moving across shelves, pots, and a small stove. Her hands touched the wooden table as if afraid it would vanish. Daniel watched her carefully, giving her space. "Show me," he said gently. Pointing to the stove, she looked at him, then at her basket, then back at him. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, but a spark. She placed her basket on the table, and her fingers moved quickly, washing, cutting, preparing. Her silence was heavy, but her movement spoke louder than words. The smell of herbs filled the air. The sizzle of vegetables on the pan made the small room alive. Daniel leaned on the wall, arms crossed, watching her work. He did not ask questions. He only observed. The more she cooked, the more the fear in her eyes softened. For a moment, she forgot she was alien. She forgot the whispers. She was only a cook again, and this kitchen became her safe place. When the food was ready, she placed the dish on the table. Steam rose, carrying a smell Daniel had never known, but somehow felt comforting. He took a bite, his eyes widened, then slowly closed. "This is amazing," he whispered, his voice full of wonder. She watched him eat, and something inside her chest ached. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, she whispered her first word in front of him, a voice soft, broken, but real. "Safe," she said, as if the word itself was food, as if it explained everything she wanted to tell. Daniel looked at her with quiet respect, and in that single word, he understood. This was not just cooking. This was survival, memory, and a plea for belonging. And without saying more, Daniel knew his life had just changed. Outside, the world was still suspicious, still divided, but inside this little kitchen, something new had begun. A connection born not from words, but from food, trust, and courage. And though neither of them knew it yet, this small invitation would change both their worlds forever. And the first night passed in quiet wonder. Daniel had not expected so much from a single dish, yet the taste lingered on his tongue long after the meal was finished. When he looked at her across the table, she did not smile. She did not speak. But her eyes held a small light, a fragile spark that had not been there before, and though no words were exchanged, something unspoken filled the air. The next evening, Daniel found her waiting outside his door. Her basket was smaller this time, but her hands held it tightly, as if it carried the weight of her soul. He hesitated only a second before letting her in. No questions, no conditions, just a silent understanding. She stepped inside, placed the basket on the table, and began her work. The sound of cutting, the soft scrape of the knife, the bubbling of broth. The kitchen became alive again. Daniel sat in his chair, tools and blueprints forgotten. Watching her with quiet curiosity, she moved with care, almost like a dancer, every motion deliberate. Her silence was heavy, yet it did not feel empty. It was filled with memory, with something deeper that Daniel could not yet name. At the table, the meals became a ritual. She cooked, he tasted, and though she never asked, his expression gave her answers. When he smiled, she relaxed. When he frowned, she adjusted. When he was silent, she studied his face like a book she could not fully read. Through food, she began to understand him, and through eating, he began to understand her. But Daniel also noticed something else. Each time the fire sparked too bright, or a pan burned too hot, her hands shook, her eyes would widen, her breath quicken, and she froze, trapped in some invisible memory. It was as if flames did not only burn food, they burned her past. Daniel pretended not to notice, giving her space but deep. Inside, his heart grew heavy with questions. Outside the small home, whispers spread through the colony. Neighbors saw her entering his door night after night, carrying baskets, leaving late. "She is using him," one man hissed. "She is dangerous," another warned. "Aliens are liars, don't you see?" a woman whispered to her child. The rumors wrapped around them like smoke, invisible but suffocating. Daniel heard the talk at work, in the markets, even from friends. They told him to stop, to push her away, to think of his safety. But when he returned home and found her waiting, silent but steady, he could not do it. Something in her silence pulled him closer. Something in her cooking spoke louder than fear won. Evening as they ate, Daniel leaned forward. His voice was calm, but his eyes were searching. "Do you have family?" he asked carefully, gently. The spoon slipped from her hand, falling to the floor with a sharp clatter. Her shoulders stiffened, her eyes filled with something raw. Her lips trembled, but no sound came. She looked away, refusing to meet his gaze. Her silence was not empty this time. It was screaming. Daniel quickly raised his hand. "It's all right," he said softly. "You don't have to answer." But the damage was already done. Her hands curled tightly on the edge of the table, her breath uneven. Slowly, she stood, gathering her basket, moving toward the door. For the first time, Daniel feared she would not return. Yet as she reached the doorway, she paused, her back to him, her voice barely above a whisper. My Mother. She breathed. The words cracked and fragile. Then silence again, heavier than before. She left, the door closing softly behind her, leaving Daniel alone with the fading warmth of the meal. That night, Daniel could not sleep. He turned. In his bed, the taste of her food and the sound of her broken word haunting him, he realized then, her silence was not choice, it was pain. Every meal she cooked was not just food, but memory. And he wondered if, by inviting her in, he had opened wounds she had tried to bury. The next day, he expected her not to return. But as the evening sun touched the colony walls, there she was, standing by his door again, basket in hand. Her eyes were red, but her steps were steady. She entered without a word, set the basket down, and began to cook. Daniel did not speak. He only sat quietly, letting her silence fill the room. The smell rose once more, filling the small space with warmth. When she placed the food before him, he ate slowly, savoring each bite. Then gently, he set down his spoon and said, "You don't have to speak, not until you want to, not until you feel ready." Her eyes widened, her hands froze, and for the first time she looked directly into his eyes. No words passed between them, but in that moment something shifted. The silence no longer felt like a wall. It felt like a bridge. Outside, the colony still whispered, still doubted. But inside the kitchen, two people shared quiet meals. And with each dish, each taste, each silent glance, trust began to grow, fragile, uncertain, but real. And though she still carried shadows of her past, Daniel knew one truth. Her silence was not emptiness. It was strength waiting to be heard. The nights passed one after another, and the silent meals became part of Daniel's life. He no longer felt his home was empty, no longer heard only the hum of broken machines at night. Now there was the sound of chopping, the gentle stir of a spoon, the hiss of steam. It was strange how silence could feel so alive, so full of meaning. But one evening everything changed. She arrived as usual, basket in hand, eyes lowered. Yet when she cooked, there was something different in her touch. Her hands moved slower, gentler, almost as if every slice of the knife carried a memory. When she placed the dish in front of him, Daniel could smell something new, a scent unlike any human spice. It was sweet and bitter at the same time, a smell that made the air heavy with emotion. Daniel took a bite, and the taste flooded his senses. It was warm but sharp, soft but heavy. Not just food. It was a story told through flavor. He looked at her, eyes wide, and whispered, "This is not human food." For the first time she raised her eyes fully, her lips parted, and in a low voice, trembling but real, she said, "My mother taught me this." The words seemed to shake the room, because she had spoken more than a single word. She looked down again, but her voice continued. "Long ago, before the war, my people shared meals with humans." Her fingers traced the edge of the table, her shoulders tense. "We cooked together, laughed together. But then, fire and fear came, and everything ended." Daniel listened, his heart heavy. He could almost see it in her eyes. A world where humans and her people were not enemies but neighbors. A world destroyed, leaving her alone, with only recipes as survivors. He realized then that every meal she had cooked for him was more than food. Each dish was a memory, a piece of history carried across space. Her silence was not just fear. It was protection, holding in stories too painful to tell. She stood suddenly, moving to her basket. From inside, she pulled a small glass jar, sealed tightly with cloth and string. The jar glowed faintly, filled with a deep red powder. She placed it in front of him, her eyes unreadable. "This," she said softly, "is the last gift of my world." Daniel leaned forward, staring at the jar. "What is it?" he asked, though his voice felt almost too loud. She touched it gently, like one would touch something sacred. "A spice," she whispered, "from my home. It does not grow here. It will never grow again." Her eyes glistened with unfallen tears. "My mother gave it to me before everything ended." Her voice broke and silence returned. But this silence was filled with grief. Daniel reached out but stopped, not daring to touch the jar. He could see in her trembling hands how precious it was. This was not just a spice. It was memory, heritage, family, all trapped inside one small jar, and now she had chosen to share it with him. He felt the weight of trust heavier than any tool or machine he had ever carried. That night, she used the spice carefully. Only a pinch. The food filled the room with a fragrance so powerful it felt alive. Daniel ate, and it was as if he tasted her past, her mother's love, her people's joy. When he looked at her, she was not just an alien anymore, not just a stranger. She was a daughter, a survivor, a keeper of a world that no longer existed. After the meal, the two sat in silence. The jar sat between them on the table, glowing faintly in the dim light. Daniel wanted to ask more, wanted to know everything, but he stopped himself, afraid that questions would reopen wounds not ready to heal. So instead he simply said, "Thank you." His voice gentle but firm. She blinked, surprised, as if no one had ever thanked her before. That single word seemed to soften her. Her shoulders relaxed, and for the first time her lips curved, not fully but almost, the beginning of a smile. It was faint, fragile, like a candle in the dark, but it was real, and Daniel felt warmth in his chest that he had not felt in years. Outside, the colony still whispered against her, but inside, around that small wooden table, something greater than fear was growing. Not just trust, not just friendship, but a bond written in flavors, in memory, in silence shared. Daniel knew then. Her silence was not weakness. It was her way of protecting what little remained of her people. And now by cooking, she was not just surviving. She was keeping them alive through him. As the night grew deeper, Daniel looked at the glowing jar once more. He wondered what dangers it might bring, what stories it might unlock. But he also knew one truth. This was only the beginning. The kitchen was no longer just his home. It had become a bridge, connecting two broken worlds through one shared taste of the past. The days turned into weeks, and the kitchen no longer felt like Daniel's alone. It had become their place, a small world where silence spoke louder than words. Each evening she arrived, basket in hand, and each evening Daniel waited, not with impatience, but with quiet hope. Their bond grew not through speech but through the rhythm of meals shared. She began teaching him in small ways, pointing at the stove, showing him how to stir, guiding his hand when he chopped too slowly. Daniel laughed when he cut vegetables unevenly, and though she did not laugh aloud, her eyes shone with a spark. It was the closest thing to laughter he had ever seen in her, and it warmed him more than fire. One evening, she showed him how to use her people's spice jar. Her hands were gentle, treating it as if it were alive. She let him sprinkle only the smallest amount, nodding when he did it right. When the dish was ready, Daniel tasted it, and the flavor was both alien and familiar. It was a gift, a sharing of something sacred, and Daniel felt honored in a way he could not describe. But outside the small home, danger grew. The colony had no place for trust between human and alien. Whispers turned into anger. Anger turned into threats. "Daniel has lost his mind," they said. "She's using him, poisoning him with her food," they warned. Fear spread like fire, and fear always demanded fuel. One night, as she left his home, two men blocked her path, their faces hard, their voices sharp. "You don't belong here," one spat. "Leave him before you hurt us all," the other snarled. She clutched her basket tightly, her silence mistaken for guilt. But before they could push her, Daniel appeared, standing in the doorway. "Enough." His voice was firm, his eyes burning with quiet rage. "She has done nothing to you," he said, stepping forward. The men sneered. "You don't know what she is." Daniel shook his head, his voice steady. "I know exactly what she is. She is my friend, The words hung in the air, heavy, dangerous, but true. The men muttered curses and walked away, but their eyes promised more trouble. That night, the kitchen was different. She cooked, but her hands trembled, the knife slipping once, cutting her finger. Daniel rushed forward, grabbing a cloth, his hands gentle as he wrapped hers. "You're safe here," he whispered, his voice low but certain. Her eyes met his, wide and filled with fear. But slowly, the fear softened. For the first time, she seemed to believe him. As the days passed, she began to trust him with more than food. She showed him old cooking tools she had kept hidden, carved spoons from her people, worn but precious. She taught him dishes humans had never tasted, and together they experimented, mixing human and alien flavors. The kitchen became a place of creation, of laughter without sound, of memories shared in the language of food, but trust was not without risk. One evening, Daniel fell suddenly ill after eating a meal in the colony mess hall. Not her food, but human food prepared by careless hands. His face grew pale, his breath heavy, and he collapsed onto the table. Fear spread through the colony, whispers of poison rising instantly. Some pointed to her, accusing eyes sharp as knives. "She's done this," they cried. "She is killing him." But inside Daniel's home, she acted quickly. Her hands moved with purpose, pulling herbs and powders from her basket, mixing them with water. She pressed the drink to his lips. Forcing him to sip, Daniel's body shook. Sweat poured, but slowly the color returned to his face. His breathing steadied, his eyes opened weakly. She sat by his side the whole night, silent but unyielding, refusing to leave him. When morning came, Daniel was alive, his strength returning. The colony still doubted, still whispered poison. But Daniel knew the truth. She had saved him, not harmed him. And as he looked at her, sitting exhausted beside his bed, he realized something deeper. Trust was no longer a choice. It had become their bond, unbreakable. That evening, when he was strong enough to sit at the table again, she cooked once more. Her hands were tired, but her eyes carried a quiet determination. When she placed the food in front of him, he touched her wrist gently. "You saved me," he said, voice filled with gratitude. Her lips parted, her voice faint but steady. "I could not lose another," she whispered, her eyes clouded with memory. Daniel understood then. Her trust was fragile, her heart scarred, but her choice to stay, to protect, was stronger than fear. From that day forward, the kitchen was not just a place of meals. It became a fortress, a sanctuary, a place where trust was forged against the weight of the world. Every dish she cooked, every lesson she shared was a thread binding them closer. And though danger still lurked outside, inside those walls, two souls had begun to heal. Together, in silence, in flavor, in trust. They had built something neither war nor whispers could break. The colony was buzzing with noise. Banners were hung across the streets, lights flickered from rooftops, and children ran with excitement. It was the season of the annual festival, a time when humans gathered to celebrate survival, trade, and unity. But unity did not extend to her. Daniel heard the rules whispered all week. "No aliens at the festival," the officials said firmly. "They only bring trouble. Best keep them away." The words cut like blades, and though she said nothing, Daniel could see the sadness in her eyes every evening. She cooked for him as always, but her movements were slower, heavier, carrying the weight of exclusion. One night, as she prepared a meal, Daniel finally asked, "Do your people have festivals?" She froze, her knife hovering above the cutting board. For a long moment she was silent, then whispered, "Yes, we cooked for the whole village. Food for all. Laughter everywhere." Her voice cracked, her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Instead, she stirred the pot with trembling hands, as if stirring memories too painful to taste. Daniel felt anger rise in him. How could the colony not see what he saw, not feel what he felt when she cooked? She carried stories in her food, Love in her silence, history in every spice, and now they banned her from sharing it, as if her existence was shame. That night, Daniel made a decision. The festival arrived, streets filled with music and smell of roasted food. Families crowded around stalls, merchants shouted, laughter echoed. Daniel walked through the crowd carrying a dish wrapped in cloth. At his side she walked quietly, her head lowered, basket in her hands, eyes followed them instantly, whispers rising like storm winds. What is she doing here? Why did Daniel bring her? But Daniel ignored them, his steps steady, his heart firm. At the center square, tables were filled with dishes, bread, roasted meat, sweet fruits. Daniel placed their dish carefully on the table, unwrapping the cloth. Steam rose, carrying a scent the humans had never known. It was rich, deep, alive with spices that made the air heavy with curiosity. People stopped, noses twitching, eyes widening. What is that? A child whispered. Smells different, said another. Daniel said nothing but gently nodded to her. Her hands trembled as she took a small spoon, serving the first bite to an elder who had come forward. The old man hesitated, eyes narrowing, but the smell drew him closer. He tasted it and silence fell. Then his eyes widened, his lips parted, and a slow smile spread across his face. This is good, he murmured. Others stepped forward, drawn by the aroma. One bite turned into many, and soon the whispers of doubt became whispers of wonder. Children giggled with delight. Families leaned closer. Strangers nodded at one another. The dish spread like fire, warming hearts instead of burning them. For the first time, humans looked at her not with fear, but with awe. They did not hear her voice, but they heard her through the taste. Daniel watched, his chest heavy with pride, his eyes never leaving her. This was what she was meant to do, to share, to heal, to connect. But not everyone was pleased. In the shadows, anger brewed. Some could not accept the change, could not accept that one alien dish could silence years of suspicion. Among them was a man named Brandt, loud and bitter, who had lost family in the war. He watched the crowd praise her food and fury twisted his face. She's tricking them, he hissed. She's using her poison to win them over. His fists clenched as he slipped through the crowd, eyes fixed on her basket. By the end of the night, the dish was gone, the pot scraped clean. She stood quietly, eyes lowered, but inside her chest a small warmth grew. For the first time since her world burned, people had tasted her people's food without hate. It felt almost like home, almost like family. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "You did it." But when they returned to his home, something was wrong. Her basket was lighter than before, too light. She opened it quickly, and her breath froze. The jar, the sacred jar of red spice, was gone. Her hands shook violently, her eyes wide with panic. "No," she whispered, voice breaking. "No, no, no." Daniel searched the basket, the floor, everywhere. But the truth was clear. Someone had stolen it. Her face collapsed, her silence turning into a wound deeper than words. That jar was not just spice, and it was her mother's gift, her people's last memory. Without it, she felt empty, lost, broken. Daniel gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "We'll find it," he said firmly, his voice steady, but her eyes were filled with despair, her lips trembling as she whispered, "It is all I have left." And as the night deepened, Daniel knew this was no longer about food. It was about trust, about memory, about a bond that someone wanted to break. The festival had brought hope, but it had also awakened envy and danger, and now the fight for trust was about to turn into a fight for survival. The night after the festival was heavy with fear. Daniel sat by the table, staring at the empty space where the spice jar once sat. She paced the room, her hands trembling, her chest tight with panic. Her silence was no longer calm. It was cracked, broken, filled with grief, that jar. "It was my mother's," she whispered at last. Her voice was uneven, jagged, each word pulled like a blade from her throat. "She gave it to me before the fires came, before the soldiers came. before everything was gone. Her eyes glistened, and her breath shook as if the memory itself burned her from inside. I kept it so I could remember her, so I could keep cooking. Even when there was nothing left. Daniel's heart ached at her words. He had seen her cook with joy, with fear, with love, but never with despair. Now he realized the truth. The jar was not only spice, it was her voice, her memory, her way of keeping her family alive, and someone had stolen it, not for hunger but for hate. Outside, whispers grew sharper. The same men who had doubted her now found fuel in the missing jar. "She tricked us all," they said. "She poisoned us and hid the proof. The spice is dangerous." Others agreed. "She cannot be trusted." Every whisper was a knife, every glare another wound. The colony was no longer curious. It was turning against her again. Daniel clenched his fists, anger rising in him. "She saved my life," he told them. "She gave you food. She gave you trust." But the crowd only muttered, their fear louder than reason. At night, Daniel and she searched quietly, moving through dark alleys, asking no one, trusting no one. The colony streets were filled with music no longer, only shadows and suspicion. One evening they heard footsteps behind them. Daniel turned sharply, catching a glimpse of Brant, the bitter man who had glared at her during the festival. Brant slipped into an alley, clutching something close to his chest. Daniel's eyes narrowed. The jar. They followed, hearts racing, silence heavy between them. The alley twisted into darker streets where the lamps burned weak and the ground was wet. Brant stopped, spinning to face them, his eyes burning with hatred. "You should have stayed silent," he growled. "She's turning you against your own people, Daniel. Can't you see it?" Daniel stepped forward, his voice firm. "She's not poison, Brant, she's hope." But Brant laughed, bitter and broken. "Hope? That spice is poison. It killed my brother in the war," he snarled, lifting the jar high. "She doesn't deserve to keep it. None of her kind do." Her eyes widened, her chest heaved, and something inside her broke. For months she had kept her silence, letting food speak for her. But now, as Brant shook the jar, threatening to smash it, her voice tore out, raw and powerful. "Stop!" she screamed. The sound echoed through the alley, sharp and trembling. Brant froze, shocked, as if he had never imagined she could speak. Her voice cracked again, softer now but filled with pain. "My people, my family, are gone, but this spice is all I have left." Tears ran down her cheeks, her words rushing like water long trapped. "Every meal I cooked was for them. Every flavor was memory. Every dish was love, not poison." She fell to her knees, her hands outstretched, her eyes pleading. "Please, don't take them from me again." For the first time, Brant hesitated. His eyes flickered with doubt, his grip on the jar loosening. But anger still lived in him. He snarled and raised his arm, ready to throw the jar against the wall. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing Brant's wrist, the two struggling in the narrow alley. The jar slipped, spinning in the air, glass catching the dim light. Time slowed. She gasped, her heart stopping as the jar fell toward the ground. Daniel dove, his hands reaching, his chest hitting the cobblestones. At the last moment, his fingers closed around the jar, the glass clinking but unbroken. He held it tight against his chest, breathing hard. Brant cursed, shoving Daniel aside before disappearing into the shadows. Silence filled the alley, heavy, fragile. Daniel stood slowly, the jar still safe in his hands. He turned, offering it to her, but she shook her head, tears still falling. "No," she whispered, her voice raw. "I don't need it now." Daniel frowned, confused, but she stepped closer, placing her hand over his. "You saved me, not the jar," she said softly. Her voice cracked again, but it was steady, certain. "I thought I needed the spice to remember, but I was wrong." Her eyes glistened as she looked at him. "You are my memory now. You are my safe place." Daniel's chest tightened, words failing him. He had never seen her so open, never heard her speak so many words. Her silence had broken, But what came from it was not weakness. It was strength. Together they walked back, the jar still in his hands, not as a treasure anymore, but as a symbol of what had been lost and what had been found. The colony might still whisper, might still doubt, but Daniel knew something had changed forever. Her silence had been broken not by force but by trust, and now her voice, though fragile, carried more power than any whisper of fear. The jar sat on the table between them, unbroken, but something had changed. It no longer glowed with the weight of her past, no longer held the power to silence her. She had spoken. She had cried. She had broken the wall of silence that bound her heart, and Daniel understood. The spice was not her voice anymore. She was, but the colony did not rest. Rumors spread faster than fire. They fight in alleys, some said. She is dangerous, others hissed. And though Daniel defended her, though some people remembered the taste of her festival dish, suspicion still lived in many hearts. They were waiting for proof, for a reason to cast her out forever. One morning, an announcement rang through the colony. The governor declared, "A grand meal to close the festival. Every family will bring their best dish," the message said. "It will show our strength, our unity, our survival." Daniel knew at once what this meant. It was a chance, their only chance, for her to stand before everyone, not in shadows, not with whispers, but in truth. That night, she sat at the table, hands folded, eyes lowered. Daniel spoke softly. "We don't need the spice, we can make something new." She looked at him, fear and doubt in her eyes. "But without the jar, my people's taste is gone," she whispered. Daniel shook his head, voice firm but kind. "No, it's not gone. It's in you, in your hands, in your memory, in your heart." The words struck her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She closed her eyes, breathing slowly, remembering her mother's touch, her father's laughter, her people's kitchens filled with warmth. And when she opened them, there was a quiet fire within her. "I will cook," she whispered. "Not for the jar, but for us." The day of the grand meal arrived. The colony square was crowded, tables filled with roasted meats, baked breads, fruits and sweets. Merchants shouted proudly. Families boasted of recipes passed down for generations. And in the middle of it all, Daniel stood by her side, carrying their small pot. Whispers rose instantly. "She dares show her food again. This is madness." But Daniel ignored them, his eyes only on her. She set the pot gently on the table, her hands steady, her silence stronger than the noise around her. When she uncovered the dish, steam lifted, carrying a smell unlike any other. It was not the jar's spice, and it was something new, something born from memory and invention. A blend of human herbs and alien knowledge, a taste of two worlds together. The crowd leaned closer despite themselves, noses twitching, mouths watering. She served the first spoon to a child, a little girl who looked up with wide eyes. The girl tasted it, then gasped, smiling. It's wonderful." More people stepped forward, drawn by curiosity stronger than fear. One by one, they tasted and silence fell. Then smiles spread, voices rose, and the crowd buzzed with wonder. "It tastes like home," one man said. "It tastes like hope," a woman whispered. For the first time, no one argued, no one doubted. Her dish had spoken for her, louder than words ever could. The governor himself tasted, his eyes widening. He looked at her, then at Daniel, and nodded, slowly. Perhaps there is place for her kind here," he said, his voice reluctant but honest. And though the words were small, they were enough to shift hearts, enough to open a door. When the crowd dispersed, Daniel and she sat at the table, their pot nearly empty. She looked at him, her lips trembling, then finally curving into a smile. Not a faint spark, but a true smile, fragile yet full of light. She whispered, "I thought I needed silence to survive, but I was wrong." Daniel tilted his head, waiting. Her voice came steady now, quiet but strong. "I needed trust. And I found it in you. Daniel's chest tightened and he reached across the table, placing his hand gently over hers. You don't need many words, he said softly. Your cooking already speaks louder than anything. She closed her eyes, her hand tightening over his, then in the softest voice, yet clearer than ever before, she said, Thank you, human. The night settled around them, warm and quiet. Outside, the colony was still divided, still uncertain. But inside that kitchen, something had been healed, not just between a human and an alien, but between two broken hearts. The final meal had not only filled stomachs, it had filled souls. And in the silence after, no longer heavy, no longer fearful, there was peace.